My name is Cassie Reed. I am 31, and my parents put my name on my brother's $86,000 bail bond after I said no 3 times at Sunday dinner. They thought I would stay quiet because the hearing was in front of family. They forgot my phone had recorded every word, and the court clerk asked to play it before the judge signed anything. Before I tell you how the clerk changed the room, you need to understand what the bond packet meant to me. It was not just money. It was time, discipline, and the part of my life I built without asking my family to clap for it. For 7 years, I had been the reliable one. I was the one who answered late calls, remembered appointments, made copies, checked totals, and stayed calm when other people made messes they wanted to rename as emergencies. That calmness became dangerous in my family. They mistook it for permission. They thought because I did not shout, I would not object. They thought because I helped once, I had agreed forever. The object I kept from that season was the folded bond packet. At first, it looked small. By the end, it was the thing everyone in the room had to stare at. I had paid rent once, phone deposits twice, and one towing bill that my brother promised to repay before the ink dried on my receipt. I was proud of what I had built, but I was careful with that pride. In my family, showing pride was an invitation for someone to call you selfish. My parents had a talent for taking my boundaries and turning them into group discussions. If I said no, my mother asked why I was angry. If I asked for time, my father said I was making the family wait. If I asked for paperwork, somebody laughed and said real family did not need signatures. That sentence always told me who expected to benefit from confusion. The pattern started years before bond hearing. It started with little tests, a borrowed card, a missed repayment. A favor described as temporary until nobody remembered the temporary part except me. When I corrected the record, I was accused of keeping score. I was keeping receipts. There is a difference. Scores are for punishment. Receipts are for survival, when people rewrite the game after losing. By the time this happened, I had learned to save messages, scan forms, and send follow-up emails after conversations that felt too slippery to trust. I did not do that because I wanted revenge. I did it because I was tired of being told I had imagined things everyone else found convenient to forget. The first warning came quietly. It was not dramatic. It was not music swelling in the background. It was a phrase in a message, a timing detail that did not fit. A family member speaking like a decision had already been made for me. I remember where I was because my body understood the danger before my mind finished reading. The words sounded casual, but the assumption underneath them was not casual at all. They had moved from asking to announcing. I replied in writing because I wanted the answer to have a timestamp. No. I do not consent. Do not use my name. Do not represent me. Do not assume I will fix this later. It felt excessive when I typed it. Then I remembered every time my family had said, "You never told us that." So I sent the message and saved the screenshot. That screenshot became part of the folder. The second warning was public pressure. That was always their favorite tool. Private conversations could fail, but a room full of relatives, guests, officials, or witnesses made them feel powerful. They believed I had been trained too well to embarrass them. What they never understood was that I had stopped being afraid of embarrassment the first time I realized embarrassment was the leash they used to pull me back into obedience. When my father said I was difficult, I asked for the document. When my mother said I was making everyone uncomfortable, I asked who had authorized my name. When my brother Dax looked at me like I was the problem, I asked whether they had seen my actual signature. Nobody had a clean answer. They had confidence, they had volume, they had family history. I had the refusal recording. The betrayal itself was almost boring on paper, which is how serious betrayals usually look. A line filled in where it should have been blank, a box checked, a claim submitted, a meeting scheduled, a signature assumed. The damage was not in one dramatic sentence. It was in the assumption that my consent was a family resource. That was the part I could not let pass, because if they got away with it once, the story would change by next Thanksgiving. I would not be the person they used. I would be the person who agreed and later got bitter. I had watched them do that to other people. Aunt Mira had become dramatic after she refused to lend money. My cousin Lyle had become selfish after he asked for his truck back. My grandmother had become confused whenever she remembered promises that cost my parents something. I was not going to become another adjective in their house. So I built the folder. The folder was not pretty. It was not cinematic. It was labeled with the date and kept in the cloud and on a flash drive because I trust people, but I trust backups more. Inside were the refusal recording, the clerk confirmation call, and the guarantor page. I added screenshots with full timestamps. I added call logs. I added the message where I said no. I added the reply where nobody answered the no directly. That matters. When people plan to pressure you later, they often avoid writing the part they know is wrong. They write around it. They write about family. They write about hurt feelings. They write about how disappointed they are. They do not write, "I am ignoring your consent because I benefit from it." So I wrote the truth in my replies, calmly, repeatedly, in complete sentences. No, I did not authorize this. No, I will not sign after the fact. No, you may not represent me. No, I am not confused. On the morning of bond hearing, I dressed like somebody who expected to be underestimated. Nothing flashy. Nothing that announced war. Just clean clothes, quiet shoes, and the folder in my bag. My hands shook once in the parking lot. I let them. Being calm does not mean your body has not noticed danger. It means you decide what your body does next. I breathed until the shaking stopped. Then I walked in. The room looked exactly like my family wanted it to look. Official enough to scare me, public enough to shame me, crowded enough to make backing down feel like the polite choice. My parents, 2 aunts, my brother, and a judge who had already seen too many family emergencies pretending to be paperwork. I could feel their eyes before anyone spoke. My mother gave me the look I knew from childhood, the one that meant, "Do not make this harder than it has to be." I almost smiled because by then I finally understood. It was only easy when I was the one paying. Then came the line. Every family like mine has one. A sentence polished by entitlement until it sounds reasonable to outsiders. She supports her brother in principle. The room accepted it for half a second. That half second mattered. That was the window where the old me would have swallowed my correction because correcting it felt rude. I did not swallow it. I said, "That is not true." My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Quiet truth lands harder in a room that expected performance. My father sighed like I was exhausting. My mother shook their head like I was breaking a sacred rule. But the clerk looked at me, not at them. That was the first moment I felt the room tilt. The court clerk, Ms. Ballard, asked one simple question. Do you have proof? Not feelings, not family history, not an explanation of why I was hurt. Proof. I took out the folded bond packet and the folder. There is a sound paper makes in a quiet room when everyone realizes the conversation is about to stop being emotional. I have loved that sound ever since. I handed over the first document, then the second, then the third. Nobody interrupted while the clerk read. That was new. My family had interrupted my whole life. They had interrupted my grief, my sleep, my work, my plans, my answers. They could not interrupt a document in someone else's hands. The first document showed the date. The second showed the account, permit, title, filing, or signature that belonged to me. The third showed the lie. It is strange how small lies look once they are printed. At home, a lie can fill a whole kitchen. It can make a daughter doubt herself. It can make relatives nod along because nodding costs less than honesty. On paper, the same lie becomes a line item. A line item can be checked. The clerk checked it. The room waited. My father tried to speak. The clerk raised one hand without looking away from the page. That gesture did more for me than years of family conversations. Then the official record entered the story. For the bond packet, the record was clear. The name was mine. The authority was mine. The consent had not been given. The number attached to it was $86,000. I watched that number move through the room. Numbers have a special power in family drama. They take something people want to call attitude and turn it into exposure. Suddenly, this was not about whether I was nice. It was about who had tried to move, sell, pledge, redirect, claim, or use something they did not own. My brother Dax stared at my father differently after that. That stare mattered too. There is a moment in every betrayal when the person helping the betrayer realizes they were also being used. It does not fix everything, but it changes the weather. My father tried the emotional version next. After facts failed, feelings became the defense. I was cold. I was embarrassing the family. I was making things legal. I was choosing paperwork over blood. I said, "Paperwork is what people ask for when blood starts lying." That sentence landed harder than I expected. My mother looked wounded, but I had finally learned the difference between wounded and accountable. Wounded asks for comfort. Accountable asks what needs to be repaired. Nobody asked what needed to be repaired. They asked me to stop. That told me everything. The recording was worse for them because it did not sound like a fight. It sounded ordinary. Forks on plates, a chair scraping, my brother coughing once because he hated silence. Then my father's voice, patient and heavy, saying, "Just sign it, Cassia. He is your brother." Then my voice, tired but clear, "No, I am not signing a bail bond." The judge did not react at first. He listened the way people listen when they have learned not to trust facial expressions. When the part played where my mother said, "Family does not make everything legal," the clerk looked down at the paperwork in front of her. That was the sentence that broke the room. Not because it was loud, because it explained exactly why they had tried to use me. They wanted family to be bigger than law, only while the law was holding my name. Dax put both hands over his face. For once, he looked less angry than ashamed. I did not look at him for comfort. I looked at the judge. "Your Honor," I said, "I am asking that the record reflect I refused before this filing was submitted." The judge nodded. For the first time in my life, my no was not a mood. It was a record. The climax was not shouting. It was procedure. That is what people miss about quiet revenge. The satisfying part is not volume. It is watching a system that they thought would pressure you become the system that protects the truth. The clerk read the relevant line out loud. My name, my right, my refusal, my record. The room could not unhear it. My phone came back into my hand near the end, and it felt heavier than before. Not because the object had changed, because I had. I was no longer carrying proof in case they hurt me. I was carrying proof because they already had, and I was done pretending confusion was kindness. The decision was simple after that. The bond was rejected, the false guarantor page was flagged, and my name came off the case before it could become a debt. No thunder, no movie speech, no instant healing, just a record corrected in public. That was enough. Actually, it was more than enough, because public correction was the one thing my family had tried to avoid by making the pressure public first. They wanted witnesses when they expected me to fold. They got witnesses when the truth stood up. I remember looking around and realizing nobody could return the room to the shape it had before I opened the folder. That is the thing about proof. Once it enters, everyone who keeps lying has to do it on purpose. Afterward, the calls started. Not apologies, not at first. Explanations. You know how my father gets. You know my mother was under stress. You know this could have been handled privately. I said the same thing every time. It was private when I said no. It became public when they ignored me. Some relatives did not like that. They preferred the version where peace meant I absorbed the damage quietly. But peace built on one person's silence is not peace. It is storage. And I was done being the storage unit for other people's shame. The private confrontation came later. It always does. People who fail in public often wait until there are no witnesses to ask for the version of you they could control. My father said I had humiliated them. I said, I documented you. My mother said I had changed. I said, yes. That answer made them angrier than any speech could have, because change was the one thing they had counted on me avoiding. They had built a whole family system around the assumption that I would stay useful, guilty, and quiet. I had been useful. I had been guilty. I had been quiet. Only one of those was still available, and it was not quiet. The months after were not clean. They never are. I missed people who had hurt me. I questioned whether I had been too hard. I replayed the room at night and imagined softer versions where everyone understood sooner. Then I reread the folder. Not because I wanted to stay angry, because I needed to stay honest. Memory becomes gentle when you love the people who harmed you. It starts sanding down the sharp parts so you can sleep. Documents do not do that. Documents say, this happened. Documents say, you said no. Documents say, they continued anyway. That clarity became my medicine. I rebuilt the practical parts first. Passwords, contacts, access, locks, forms, permissions. Every place my family had treated as a side door, I closed. Some people call that bitterness. I call it maintenance. A boundary is not a wall built out of anger. Sometimes it is just a door with a working lock. The people who loved me without needing access adjusted quickly. The people who loved access more than me called me difficult. That difference made decisions easier. What surprised me most was the relief. Not joy, not at first. Relief. Relief when the phone rang and I did not answer immediately. Relief when a family text arrived and I waited until after dinner to read it. Relief when I realized an emergency on their end did not automatically become a command on mine. For the first time in years, my life had quiet inside it. I had not known how loud obligation was until it stopped speaking in my mother's voice. I had not known how heavy guilt was until I put it down and nobody died. That is the part nobody tells you. Setting a boundary can feel like grief before it feels like freedom. People ask whether I forgave them. I ask what they mean by forgive. If they mean I stopped waking up angry, yes. If they mean I handed back the same access, no. Forgiveness is not a universal password. It does not reopen accounts. It does not erase filings. It does not make a forged assumption valid after the fact. I can wish someone well from a distance that keeps me safe. I can love the child I was without re-enlisting her for another round of family duty. I can remember good moments without pretending the bad ones were misunderstandings. That is not revenge. That is adulthood. I still keep the folded bond packet, not because I want to relive the worst day, because it reminds me that the truth does not have to be dramatic to be strong. A saved file, a timestamp, a signature, a refusal, a record. Those things can do what tears cannot do in a room full of people committed to misunderstanding you. One detail I did not understand until later was how carefully my father had counted on my silence. Silence was not a side effect in this plan. It was the plan. They needed me to feel too embarrassed, too tired, or too loyal to name the thing they had done. Once I named it clearly, the entire structure began to shake. That is why the timeline mattered. Dates are not decoration in a story like this. Dates prove what people knew and when they knew it. They show whether a mistake was corrected after notice or repeated after warning. My family wanted everything to feel like one messy misunderstanding. The timeline showed a choice. I also learned that calm does not mean soft. Calm can be the hand that keeps the folder closed until the right person is in the room. Calm can be the voice that says the same sentence twice without apologizing for it. Calm can be the reason nobody gets to distract you with tone when the facts are finally ready. The hardest part was not proving the document. The hardest part was accepting that proof was necessary. There is a small grief in realizing your own family will not believe your no unless a stranger with a badge, title, desk, or official email address repeats it back to them. I let myself feel that grief later, not in the room, later. After the decision, I made one promise to myself. I would never again confuse being needed with being loved. Need can be urgent, loud, flattering, and cruel. Love can accept a boundary without treating it like betrayal. That difference became the rule I used for every relationship after that day. One detail I did not understand until later was how carefully my father had counted on my silence. Silence was not a side effect in this plan. It was the plan. They needed me to feel too embarrassed, too tired, or too loyal to name the thing they had done. Once I named it clearly, the entire structure began to shake. That is why the timeline mattered. Dates are not decoration in a story like this. Dates prove what people knew and when they knew it. They show whether a mistake was corrected after notice or repeated after warning. My family wanted everything to feel like one messy misunderstanding. The timeline showed a choice. I also learned that calm does not mean soft. Calm can be the hand that keeps the folder closed until the right person is in the room. Calm can be the voice that says the same sentence twice without apologizing for it. Calm can be the reason nobody gets to distract you with tone when the facts are finally ready. The hardest part was not proving the document. The hardest part was accepting that proof was necessary. There is a small grief in realizing your own family will not believe your no unless a stranger with a badge, title, desk, or official email address repeats it back to them. I let myself feel that grief later, not in the room, later. That is my story. My parents thought the bond packet belonged to the family because I had been generous with my life. The clerk showed them the difference between generosity and consent. I stopped being the emergency contact for people who only remembered I existed when a bill needed a signature. If you are the reliable one, the quiet one, the one everyone calls when consequences arrive, remember this: your name is not an emergency exit for people who refuse to face the door they opened.